Είμαστε εδώ με τον Adam Chodzko, ένα Βρετανό καλλιτέχνη που θα παρουσιάσει από τις 21 Νοεμβρίου το έργο You'll see this time it will be different στη ράμπα του Μουσείου Μπενάκη εδώ στην Οδό Πειραιώς. Το έργο είναι μια παραγγελία του Μουσείου Μπενάκη, ένα έργο που έκανε ειδικά για το κτίριο της Πειραιώς και εντάσσεται στο πλαίσιο μιας σειράς project με τίτλο «Καλλιτέχνες σε διάλογο με το Μουσείο Μπενάκη», μια συνεργασία με το Βρετανικό Συμβούλιο, κατά την οποία καλούμε καλλιτέχνες από τη Βρετανία και την Ελλάδα να δημιουργήσουν έργα που συνδιαλέγονται με το μουσείο, με τις συλλογές αλλά και με το χώρο του και που θέτουν ζητήματα όπως η αναπαράσταση της μνήμης και της ιστορίας, τα όρια του μουσείου, ο ρόλος του θεατή μέσα σε αυτό το περιβάλλον και η σχέση του έργου με το θεσμικό πλαίσιο το οποίο το υποδέχεται. Ο Adam Chodzko είναι ένας καλλιτέχνης με αρκετά χρόνια καριέρα στη Βρετανία, που ενδιαφέρεται μέσα από εγκαταστάσεις κυρίως που χρησιμοποιούν τον ήχο, το βίντεο αλλά και την performance, για τις αντιμεταθέσεις και τις μετατοπίσεις αντικειμένων, για τις αναπαραστάσεις της ιστορίας και της συλλογικής μνήμης, για τη σύνδεση του λογικού αλλά και του παράλογου στοιχείου και για τις συμπαραδηλώσεις ομάδων ή περιοχών που βρίσκονται στα όρια της κουλτούρας. Πρόσφατα παρουσίασε το έργο του στη Date Britain στο πλαίσιο της έκθεσης Sweeters in Britain, για την οποία έκανε μια σημαντική εγκατάσταση, και στην Γκαλερί Raven Rose στο Λονδίνο. Adam, welcome. Can you describe in a few words the work you will present here in the Benaki Museum in the Piraeus building?
Yeah, it's going to be the idea is I'm projecting the museum into the future, or this part of the museum into the future, and having a retrospective of exhibition posters that have taken place in the future, and also showing or alluding to or suggesting where those posters were being looked after, where they were being collected. So it's a fiction which in the end is meant to send this part of the museum into, with the idea that it's a kind of time machine.
So you have been here all week doing research for this work. What have you been up to this week, and what has your research consisted in?
A lot of it has been looking at images in the photographic archive of the Benaki Museum, and also looking at the objects in the collection, and as well as looking at the actual objects and the images, I've also been trying to observe how I react to a kind of oversaturation of imagery, or a superabundance of imagery. Because I'm always asking myself, wondering what the expectation is when we go and see an ancient object or a recent object, when we go and see art, when we go to a museum, what are we hoping will happen? What will happen to us as a result of doing this? I think with this kind of observation of my own looking, and also speculating about how other people look at, look in a museum or look at images in an archive, I'm also always wondering, particularly at a point of fatigue or tiredness or weariness, as to why a certain object or image holds your attention. So I'm very curious about those kind of very intuitive reactions to a face within a photograph, or a particular object or a particular shape, as to why, separate from another 200 that have been viewed, why one particularly holds attention. And I think also I'm very aware that I'm doing this as an outsider and not an expertise of any of these kind of categories. And I'm curious about how I'm mistranslating and misunderstanding and trying to kind of work with those ideas of being outside and separate from a culture, or from a kind of art historical expertise. And with the project as a whole, I mean, sort of becoming aware with the Benaki Museum of all the different types of expertise, whether it's a curator or, a paper conservator or a graphic designer. I'm trying in this project to, which is an absurd thing, to take on every single one of those roles, as curator, as designer, as custodian of the works, So it's almost contracting the whole job of the museum into kind of one person, an outsider, which is maybe not a good idea. But I think part of this comes from the idea of thinking of a museum or an institution as becoming the embodiment of a person, and therefore the museum dreams, the museum has nightmares, the museum has a kind of psychological and emotional reaction to things. And I think a lot of that, I mean, I've worked with before, but I'm particularly interested with the Bennacki Museum because of this very literal embodiment of Bennacki within the museum. So the plaque on the outside of the Bennacki Museum, just within the Bennacki Museum, where Bennacki's heart is placed within inside the fabric of the building, and therefore somehow makes the building kind of live and breathe as a body. So, and as a body, you know, having excess and having trauma and, you know, hopes and desires and all those kind of things.
Now, how does both the research you did here, the way you perceive the museum as you take as a living organism, and the work you will present in the Piraeus building relate to the rest of your work, and especially your work of 2013?
I think practically all my work has been a proposal for how, if reality shifts slightly because of some kind of event, whether that's a political change or an economic change or an environmental change, or just simply a shift of beliefs, then how might our relationship to objects and to each other and to the places that we live, how might that be reinvented? So I'm seeing that very much in this context. So practically all the work that I've done in the past is in a sense, is a kind of science fiction of an alternative reality. And recently it's become very much focused around the idea of empathizing, putting oneself in the position of someone else, whether it's an institution, and the idea of remote influence on something. So the idea of things being shaped from outside, again the idea of things being mistranslated or misunderstood, but that becoming a very positive way of bringing about change and transformation. And recently, I guess thinking about particular works, there was a project I did for the Tate, which was fusing together a Frank Lloyd Wright office that was from Pittsburgh, and melding it together, or kind of exploding it, with Kurt Schwitter's Merzbahn, which was in the Lake District. And so I think with that I was thinking about the transfer of objects following the kind of desires or thoughts or wishes of two individuals, the artist and the kind of philanthropist, patron. And also the idea of things that go missing, things that sort of can't appear in the museum. And so Raven Row was this proposal for a palm tree which would have destroyed the space. So the whole piece is about this, the fact that the palm tree couldn't arrive. So really what you're presented with is the absence of this huge kind of monolithic structure.